in my opening remarks, I said, this is the goal, to ensure that AI systems are guaranteed to operate safely and ethically. We didn't include the word forever, because maybe it was too doomy, but we mean forever. Think of it as, okay, we're going to go to the airport and get on an airplane, with our kids. And when we do that, we think, wow, we really had better trust the people who made this airplane, the people who are going to fly the airplane, the people on the ground, the people in the air traffic control, and so on. We have to trust a lot of people. And we trust that our governments have done the work to make sure that those people do their work. And now imagine that we're going to get on this airplane with our children. Everyone in this room, everyone in the city of Paris, everyone in France, everyone in the world is getting onto this brand new kind of airplane that has really never been tested before. And it's going to take off, and it's never going to land. It has to fly forever and not crash. The engines can't fail, the navigation can't fail, the altimeter can't fail. It has to fly forever and not crash because the whole human race is in that airplane. So that's the situation that we're in. And yes, we need to make sure that everyone has done their job before we're willing to get into that airplane. So, there's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of moving pieces that have to work for us to move forward on this. At the moment, we talk about safe and ethical, but we don't really know exactly what that means. Even if we did know what it means, we don't know how to build AI systems that are, in fact, safe and ethical. And even if they are, in fact, safe and ethical, we don't know how to prove that they are safe and ethical. And we need both. It's not enough that they be safe and ethical. I'm still not putting my kids on that plane until I know that it's safe and ethical. And then we have to make sure that, in fact, all the procedures are in place to make sure that that's the airplane that we're getting on, that that's what is built and tested and guaranteed to make sure that safe and ethical AI systems are the ones that are used. So that's a governance problem, a policy problem. And there's a complement of that, right, to make sure that the unsafe and unethical AI systems are not used. And these are two different problems. One is a regulatory problem, and one is a policing and enforcement problem. So we have to solve all of these. So I'm going to talk about some ideas, and now I'm sort of shifting from an organizational perspective to much more of a personal perspective. I'm not trying to cover everyone's work in the world. I'll just talk about some ideas that I think are interesting, some questions that I'm currently struggling with. And let's start with what does safe and ethical mean? So the way I think about this, to try to break it down and try to make some progress, is first of all to divide into two cases, right? The one case is if there's only one person on Earth and we're maybe, then in that case, some aliens are building an AI system to help that person, right? How do the aliens build that AI system for the one person who's living on Earth, on his desert island or whatever? We don't really have great answers even to that case. There are still significant philosophical disagreements. I read recently that they actually took a poll of moral philosophers, and it's pretty much evenly split between utilitarian, deontological. So utilitarian basically says we optimize for the preferences of the individual in this case, or the collective. Deontological says, no, there's also moral rules that we just have to stick to, right? And we've got to figure out what those rules should be on how things should be done. And then there's virtue ethics, which I have a harder time explaining, but there are experts I know in this room on virtue ethics, which has more to do with the character of the entity who's making the decisions and how we should encourage strong moral character. And there's it roughly evenly split among philosophers about which is the right way to think about making ethically correct decisions. So we still have to work through that. I think when we're talking about decisions made by an AI system, I think the moral character of the AI system, perhaps we can not worry too much. I do worry about the moral character of people, not just the decisions they make, but their moral character is important too. But for machines, I don't even know how to judge what that means. But there are open questions that we've just ignored for a long, long time. And it's because AI has mostly been operating in the toy world. Somebody was asking me the other day, back in the classical period of AI, when we had planning algorithms and decision-making algorithms, and what kind of work did we do on safety? Did we have guaranteed safety back then? I said, no, we had guaranteed correctness, right? I mean, every planning algorithm paper that you publish, you had to have a theorem showing that your algorithm is correct, is guaranteed to produce guaranteed correct plans and all that. But we didn't worry about safety because no one actually used AI for anything. So it just wasn't an issue. And so we could actually stick with theorems about safety in a non-existent world. Right? In a world defined by our own axioms that we wrote down, regardless of whether those axioms are actually correct descriptions of the real world. So we actually, I would say, totally failed to address a form of correctness that other disciplines, like control theory, for example, worries not, is my control law correct under the assumption that my physical model of the environment is correct? Does it work if I put it in the real world, knowing that it's not correct, right? Knowing that the model it was based on is not correct. And we have not really done that yet in AI to any serious extent. So there's tons of interesting things that we haven't addressed when we move into the real world. For example, in the reward function, RSAS prime, that all the reinforcement learning people assume. Well, what is S? Is it the state of the physical world? Right? Well, that wouldn't work, because then the AI system might make all kinds of changes thinking you should be happy, but you don't know about them, so you're not happy. Right? Well, is it the mental state that matters? Is S really about mental state? Because, of course, that's actually what makes you happy. Happiness is mediated through the mental state, right? Well, that wouldn't work, because then the AI system would put you into a happy mental state that had no connection to the actual state of the world. This is the matrix, and so on, right? So what is the answer? And I'm sure Toby has read a lot more philosophy on this question than I have, but it hasn't filtered through into the AI community to figure out what is the right way to think about this. To me, even in this simple one-person world, the issue that's most problematic is the question that I've underlined, the plasticity of human preferences. I think this is still an unsolved issue in moral philosophy and economics. There are several different, almost completely disjoint literatures on this question. And one obvious problem is the AI systems can satisfy your preferences by manipulating those preferences until they become true, right, or easy to satisfy, which politicians have been very good at for a long time. But an even more difficult problem is actually the preferences you have in the real world are not ones that you just got to choose autonomously, right? They are often the result of decisions made by other people, molding your preferences to suit their preferences. And so should AI systems satisfy the preferences of people who, for example, welcome their own servitude because that's how they've been brought up? And you might say, well, no, that would be terrible. But then you're in the business of saying, but actually, I know better what you should want, right? And do we want AI? Do we want AI researchers being in the business of saying, no, we know best about what people should want, as opposed to what they do want? And these are all really difficult open questions. And then when you add the fact that there's more than one person, it gets far, far more complicated. And we just have to grapple with these things. There's just a huge amount of work to be done, and we have to systematize it and figure out, what is the, where is the low-hanging fruit? What are the most important things that we have to solve first, rather than sort of having them smack us in the face when we make mistakes and do things wrong. So one interesting question I'm thinking about now, when you've got many people, then your preferences are not just about yourself, about, am I well-fed, am I healthy, do I have a nice suntan, whatever. It's how are other people doing? My concern about the happiness or unhappiness of other people becomes an important factor. For example, I might have what some economists have called positional goods, right? And these are goods that are not necessarily intrinsically valuable, but they derive their value from a kind of a ranking of you with respect to other people. So a Nobel Prize, yeah, it's a nice piece of gold, right? But why is it valuable to you? It's because it ranks you above everybody else, right? If everyone had a Nobel Prize, if everyone in the world had a Nobel Prize, no one would care about having a Nobel Prize, right? And there's nothing wrong with wanting a Nobel Prize, but that relative value of goods kind of creates a zero-sum game, and it's in some sense a counterproductive game. And people have talked about this with conspicuous consumption, where it's actually a negative-sum game because people are hiding all the work that they're doing to achieve the visible consumption that they exhibit. And so we don't want necessarily AI systems to help us do this, right? Should we zero out all of these positional goods, the identity, the status that people work so hard to achieve? That's an unanswered question. Okay, second, how do we build it? Well, this is too long a story for this talk, but I want to point out a few things. So one is, we sort of are now in this situation where we're kind of taking LLMs as, well, obviously this is the answer, and we know we just have to live with it, and this is the technology that's going to lead to AGI. But it's a sort of a strange accident, right? What are LLM, what were they for? Language models were slightly useful for improving speech recognition. They were a little bit useful for allowing you to type on your cell phone without having to type the whole word. And that was pretty much it, right? And it's sort of is it just a weird coincidence that when we made them bigger and bigger, they turned into something that now people are saying might become AGI, right? They weren't ever intended to be AGI. They weren't ever intended to be truthful, right? If you generate text from an LLM, we did in the 4th edition of my textbook back in 2020 with GPT-2. No one thought that those paragraphs that we put were supposed to be true, right? They're just random maunderings, and they happen to be grammatical and coherent, and that was really interesting, but no one expected them to be true. And so it seems to me that if we're going to have AGI or even non-agentic but really useful AI systems of high capability, we're probably going to need to build them on a different substrate. And it's not to say that we shouldn't use all of that data, the 20, 30, 50 trillion words of data that large language models are trained on. It's an incredible resource, right? And I think that's why it's not a coincidence, right? It's not a coincidence that LLMs start to look like AGI. It's because there was this enormous resource of sort of labeled human decisions. And it happens to be labeled human decisions about what word to say next, right? But 50 trillion of those decisions is a huge resource that sort of narrows down. If you start thinking like, okay, we're going to train a blank slate, and we're going to do it by adding more and more data, that narrows down the space of possible systems to things that look quite a bit like human beings. And so that's why it's not a coincidence that large language models are exhibiting the stuff that they do. But I think we might need to take a different approach. And probabilistic programming is a technology that sort of reached its takeoff point just at the wrong time, right? It started to really take off actually, exponentially. You can look at the number of papers from 2008 to, it was like 10 papers. By 2013, it was up to 1,000 papers a year and getting up, doubling every year or something like that. And then deep learning came along and LLMs came along, poof, right? You go to NeurIPS and ICML, that's all there is left. But it's an incredibly powerful technology. Using probabilistic programming languages, for example, we could build the global nuclear monitoring system for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I wrote that in the lunch break on basically the back of an envelope. It's such a powerful way of formulating, representing knowledge, and interfacing that knowledge to real data. Okay, I'm going to have to speed up because I'll be here for hours and we all need to go to dinner. I also think interpretability is a really useful thing. And not because I think interpretability is going to tell us exactly how LLMs work, or it's going to tell us when the LLM is lying. I mean, occasionally it might do that, but I think we are a long way from having interpretability methods that can understand everything that's going on. Some of it may not be comprehensible at all, and certainly not as a sort of perfect policeman to keep an eye on what's going on inside the LLM's head, but to extract the principles that allow the LLM to function so successfully, and then put those principles into engineered systems. And we've done that with lots of other, with things that biology figures out. We then put those principles into engineered systems, and I think there's a lot we can learn from LLMs, but use it in ways that we understand. So I think the biggest issue, and just to quote Charlie Munger, right, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. So Charlie Munger was the advisor to, sorry, blanking on his name, Warren Buffett, yeah, so the advisor to Warren Buffett, so partially responsible for building that vast fortune. And I think this is a reasonable first approximation. If you're building systems that are anything like rational, you've got to understand what their objectives are. And that's, in the zeroth order theory, that's what's going to happen. They're going to try or maybe succeed in achieving their objectives. And so we've always thought that, going back at least to Norbert Wiener in 1960, that alignment was the problem, right? He said, if you're going to create a mechanism with whose operation you can't interfere, you'd better be sure that the objective put into the mechanism is the objective that you really want. Now, and we in the more recent literature we call this King Midas problem, because King Midas's objective of touching things and having them turn into gold was just the wrong objective because it included his food and his drink. So alignment does not mean get the objectives of the human race and plug them into the AI system, right? That, I think, is a massively oversimplified and wrong view of what we're trying to do, right? But we are trying to build systems whose behavior is not objectionable or fatal to us on a large scale. And when we think about objectives and LLMs, and a couple of speakers have mentioned this during the conference, it does seem that they have objectives. And the reason is pretty straightforward, right? Because they are trained by imitation learning, right? They are, if you think of them as agents, right? And they are agents because they act by emitting words. So these are speech acts. They are trained to imitate human verbal behavior, and human verbal behavior is goal-driven because we're goal-driven. And so, in the limit, you would expect them to become goal-driven agents just like us, right? And to have as their goals the same goals that we do. And when Microsoft was going around announcing, talking about GPT-4 and the fact that it has sparks of AGI, I asked the speaker, I won't say who it was, but I asked the speaker, what are the goals that GPT-4 has acquired? And he said, we have no idea, right? It's sparks of AGI, has objectives. We have no idea what they are, right? This is not good. But soon we discovered some of them, right? So, for example, like many humans, they want to find someone to marry. They want to find a human being to marry because a lot of the people in the training data wanted to find a human being to marry. We don't want machines that want to marry human beings. We don't want machines that want to be rich. We don't want machines that want to attain high political office, right? It's completely wrong to build machines that have and pursue human goals on their own account. But that's exactly what we've done. And I think this is an unavoidable consequence of using imitation learning on human behavioral data. And RLHF, which is, I think it has many interesting aspects, and it's a valiant attempt. But, it's a few thousand or a few million, pats on the head or gentle spanks on a system that has been trained from trillions of examples of human behavior. And so it's kind of, and I think it was Max, it was like talking to the serial killer and saying, don't tell people that you want to kill them, right? I mean, it's just a thin layer of papering over the underlying motivations of a system. And the motivation structures are probably incredibly complex because there are thousands or millions of people in the training data, in vast ranges of circumstances with vast ranges of different motivations and sub-goals and so on. So they're far more complex goal structures, I think, than human beings do. And so if you're as old as I am, you remember in the good old days, before we had, 777s and, Airbus 380s and so on, that, the airlines and the aviation companies bred larger and larger and larger birds, and this was their plan to achieve large-scale passenger aviation. And they built very, very big birds, and they had, they were very quiet, almost inaudible in flight, incredible fuel efficiency. You just, 2 sheep, and that got you across the Atlantic. But, they kept eating the passengers, or, dropping them in the nest, or dropping them in the ocean when they got tired, or going to the wrong destination. And, eventually the FAA said, you know what, you're never going to be able to convince us that these things are safe for passenger aviation. And then they went back to the drawing board and they figured out principles of aerodynamics and structural engineering and metal fatigue and all the rest of the stuff that they needed to show that their now mechanical aircraft could deliver people safely all over the world. And that's what needs to happen, right? It cannot be the case that governments are forced to expose their populations to unacceptable risks because the developers are unable to provide any safety guarantees. It's entirely reasonable for governments to impose safety requirements that manufacturers cannot meet. Let me say that again. It's entirely reasonable for governments to impose safety requirements that manufacturers cannot meet, because the safety requirements are the safety requirements. Right? You know, people who develop nuclear power plants, they have to show their power plant has a mean time to failure of 10 million years. If they can't, right, why is that number? Well, because that's the safety level that we need if you're going to stick a nuclear plant next to a city. And we've seen that, you know, lower levels of safety are not sufficient. And you can't just say, well, it's too difficult. We don't know how to do that, so you should repeal the regulation. No. The regulation is there because that's the level of risk that we can tolerate. And the same should apply with AI. Okay, now I really will have to speed up. All right, is there something else we can do, right? You know, how do we get alignment? And so one of the things we've been working on at Berkeley for more than 10 years now, actually, is this idea of assistance games, right? Where you explicitly are building machines that do not know what the objective is, that do not know what humans want the future to be like, but they know that whatever it is that humans want the future to be like, that is what they have to help achieve, right? And this type of system actually has sort of qualitatively different properties from the classical AI systems where we specified a fixed objective up front, the reward function, the goal, the cost function, whatever it might be. These have qualitatively different behaviors. They will defer to human beings, and most importantly, they will allow themselves to be switched off. If you want to switch them off, they want to be switched off, right? And that's crucial, right? You think about taxes. The best way to get people to pay their taxes is if they want to pay their taxes, right? And if they don't want to pay their taxes and they're way smarter than you, no amount of rules or regulations or whatever are going to get them to pay their taxes. And it's the same with other desirable behaviors that we want AI systems to exhibit. They have to want to exhibit those behaviors. And in this case, we can prove they can. Okay. All right. How do we prove that these systems are actually going to be safe and ethical? Well, I mean, there's no substitute for proof. That means formal methods. Formal methods have been, I would say, a slightly embarrassing relative that, you know, occasionally you let them out of the back room in computer science because they haven't been responsible for creating multi-billion, multi-trillion-dollar companies. And there's also a big cultural divide between Europe, where correctness of software is just something that's the core topic of what we teach in computer science in a lot of European universities. I know at Berkeley, 90% of the students graduate without ever having been exposed to the notion that a program could be correct. And that's true for the vast majority of American universities who produce the vast majority of software that runs the world, which is why we have the $8 trillion negative impact of cybercrime, among other things, right? So I actually, my first work at Stanford was on formal methods with Zohar Manna, and I still believe that this field can rise again, and as in other areas of engineering, it will become absolutely normal that when you build and sell software, it comes with guarantees of whatever properties it's reasonable to ask it to have. As Zico mentioned, AI can really turbocharge the process of formal verification, formal synthesis of correct programs. So this idea has been around for a while of a formal oracle, and it's a very simple idea, right? It says you can build some completely unsafe, crazy, monstrous AGI system, but you put it in a certain kind of box where the only action that it can do, so just like a Go program, the only action that a Go program can do is put Go pieces on the board. The only action this agent can do is to decide which steps of a formal reasoning engine, whether it's logical or probabilistic or some other calculus still to be invented, it just decides which steps are taken and is using that to then search for a proof or calculate a posterior probability or whatever it might be. And so then this box, the formal oracle, I believe we can prove is safe. And to use it, you simply put in your premises, you put in the question, and you get out the answer. And you might think, oh, well, yeah, great, we can prove Fermat's last theorem, maybe we can prove Goldbach's conjecture, that's really exciting. I'm sure the math geeks will be tripping about that. No, it's so you can put in, actually, for example, mechanics is fully axiomatized. So you can put in mechanics and solid structures, and you can ask, is there a design for a 4-kilometer tall skyscraper that will resist a magnitude 10 earthquake and cost this much? And it will, the answer to the question is yes, and here it is. Right, so it's enormously economically valuable and, I believe, completely safe. So this is an example of what Max was talking about this morning. We don't have to have unconstrained AGI in order to get almost all the benefits that the AI can deliver. Okay, on regulation, there's a few things we can do right now, right? We have a European AI Act. There are working groups figuring out how to take all those very high-level principles, like there should be appropriate safety requirements for the use case, and turn them into detailed codes of practice and requirements and so on. There's also an international treaty proposed by the Council of Europe. I think there are 37 signatories so far, so we have 65 countries here, so get your countries to sign it. It says Council of Europe, but that's sort of a misnomer. The US, I think, has signed it, probably hasn't ratified it. The UK has signed it, Israel has signed it. So it's open to any country as long as they support the goals of the treaty, which are primarily around human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Gillian mentioned the need for infrastructure, for governance tools, for registration, the ability to switch systems off, and so on. And I think that's particularly important for open source AI systems. If you want to have open source systems, or as I think Elizabeth Seeger called it, irreversible proliferation systems, then you still need to know where they are, right? You can't regulate them if you don't know they exist. So open source systems, the copies have to be self-registering. They have to have off-switch code, something that Mark Rodenberg and the Center for AI and Digital Policy have been talking about for years and years. And that has to be non-removable. So it's a cryptographically interesting open problem of how to put in non-removable registration and off-switch code into AI systems. And a benefit of doing this, a benefit of having regulation, is that to comply with regulation, the companies developing these systems have to do the safety engineering and the safe by design approaches to building AI systems that I would say they haven't really had to do so far. They've been pushing almost entirely on capabilities, and perhaps that was inevitable given the stage of development, but I think it's past the point where all of that work needs to be done. And when you look at the resources, who is going to do the work? Is it going to be academics? Well, I think worldwide total budget for AI safety research in academia might be 100 million. So, but the budgets available in the private sector are possibly 10,000 times bigger. And so it's pretty clear that if the work is going to get done, and there's a lot of work to do, it has to get done in the private sector. It won't get done unless unless it has to be done in order to meet regulatory requirements. At least that's my guess. So what kind of regulatory requirements could have this effect? So an idea that's been developed over more than a year now in a series of meetings between Western and Chinese scientists called the International Dialogues on AI Safety is this idea of behavioral red lines. It's a very simple idea. It exists in other branches of engineering. But it's particularly important for AI because whereas with the nuclear power station, or let's say an airplane, right, what does it mean to have an accident? Well, it's when the airplane touches the ground when it's not supposed to, right? So it's pretty simple, right? And there are a few other bad things like people can get shaken around in turbulence and so on, but basically don't touch the ground unless you're supposed to. But AI systems are so vastly varied in their applications that you can't, at the moment, write down, okay, here is exactly the line between safe and unsafe behavior for AI systems in all contexts. But what we can do is to say, look, there are things we definitely don't want the AI systems to do, right? And so those unacceptable behaviors we can delineate, right? They're typically at the very unsafe end, and they're things like no self-replication onto other computers, no breaking into other computers, no bioweapon design for terrorists, right? Or no zero-day exploits, as Zico mentioned earlier. And then, as with pretty much every other high-risk technology with buildings, right? This building is built according to building codes, and no one could come into the building until it had been inspected for compliance with the building code, right? The food you eat is regulated this way. The restaurant can't open, the caterer can't function until they've complied with a bunch of rules designed to prevent large-scale food poisoning. The planes you all flew in here have been regulated, fortunately, so that you got here safely. And so, again, these are what we call what lawyers call ex-ante regulation. Before you access the market, you have to show your systems are not going to cross these red lines. And so in order to comply with that, I think we probably do have to understand what we're doing in AI better than we currently do, because I think it's probably the case that if you had to take a system that, as it currently exists, and demonstrate that it complies with these red lines, you're not going to be able to do it for two reasons. One is we don't know how it works, and the other is if we did know how it works, all we would be able to show is that it won't comply with the red line, right? So we have both of those problems to solve. And then lastly, how do we stop the rogue states? This is always a good question that audiences come up with. Yes, I agree, we should build AI systems that way. Yes, they should all comply, but how do we stop the people who don't want to comply? They don't care about safety. And I think, as with cybercrime, it's turned out to be incredibly difficult to police software because software is produced by typing. It's very hard to police typing, right? And it can be replicated, it weighs nothing, can be moved at the speed of light, can be replicated infinitely. So it's really difficult to police the software that is causing cybercrime. And I think it would be really difficult to prevent the creation of AI systems that cause havoc for the same reason. But we can police hardware. Unlike software, hardware is produced by equipment that costs 100 billion, that costs at least 10 years to build, tens of thousands of highly trained engineers, incredibly expensive equipment that's supplied by only a few companies in the world. And so you can have hardware that enforces governance. This is called HEG, hardware-enabled governance. And there are precedents for this with digital rights management, for example. So we can do it, right? It's no good, the argument, it's too late, it's out of the bag, it's all over, we can't do it. That's completely false, right? There was a big mess with digital rights management, and to some extent it got cleaned up with the cooperation of the manufacturers and the recording industry and so on. So we can do this, and there are now prototypes of chips that do enforce something called proof-carrying code. So proof-carrying code is code that comes with the proof that it complies with whatever property you want it to comply with. And the hardware checks the proof efficiently and then would reject software where the proof doesn't check out, right? And that's a pretty straightforward process. It's totally decentralized, right? It doesn't require certification authorities or anything like that. And I believe that if, along with how do we design the AI systems and then our understanding of how to prove them correct and safe in some forms, that this approach could be maybe is our only defense, actually. Okay. So I love this picture from Wall-E because it depicts, in a not too terrible form, one of the other major risks that people have talked about, and it was talked about a little bit on the panel about unemployment, but it also then not just unemployment, but infantilization, right? That because we don't need to become educated anymore, because our civilization doesn't need humans to run it anymore, that we then lose the incentive. And this goes back to a story by E.M. Forster in 1909 called The Machine Stops, where this is exactly what happens. If you haven't read it, it's an amazing story. It has email backlog, it has MOOCs, it has increasing unwillingness to have face-to-face contact with other people, it has computer-induced obesity, it has iPads, it has video conferencing, it has you name it. It's all in there, and the infantilization of the human race because the machine is doing everything for us. So if we design our AI systems properly, right, this is clearly something that we don't want. This is not our preferred future, right? If we design our AI systems properly, they cannot cooperate in this future, right? Probably what that means is that at some point the AI systems themselves will say, I know you say you want me to do this, but I'm not going to do it for you, right? I am not tying your shoelaces this morning. You're going to go to school. You're going to tie them yourself before you go to school, right? Parents do that for their children. At some point, they stop doing everything for the child because it's not good to do that. And the AI systems are going to have to do that too. And if we design them properly, they will. And it might be that they just, the tool form stays around. If there is agentic AI and it's properly designed, it might just stay in the background, right? It's available for planetary scale emergencies, pandemics, asteroids, whatever. But by and large, it is leaving us to manage our affairs. I think that would be great. I'd be very happy if my AI system says, no, I'm not going to help you with that. So I hope I've just given you one sliver, one particular viewpoint on some of these questions. There is a huge amount of work to do. And we need all of those disciplines that have come together in this conference to do that work. So what are the next steps? Join IASEAI. I think almost all of you probably did in the process of registering for the conference. But tell your friends if they share some of these thoughts, then they should join too. We want this to be the organization that brings together everyone who is in some sense on the side of humanity. Humanity needs to have an organization like this to represent it in some sense in this discussion. You can donate. There's a donate button on the website. We definitely need funding. We don't even have enough money to run this conference next year. Organize. So find people with views that you share. Form chapters in countries, in cities, within companies, wherever. We will develop mechanisms to help you with that, with workshops, with education, and so on. So fortunately, the Ukrainians already anticipated the need for this, so they chose orange as their color, and we've chosen orange as our color as well. So we really need to continue the Orange Revolution, except in a somewhat different vein. So educate, teach people about these ideas. We will try to bring people together to develop educational content and disseminate it. And as the research is done, we have to do the work to get the ideas out so people can use them. Volunteer. Mark mentioned that an email is going out. That email will give you an opportunity to volunteer as well as to provide feedback on the conference. And lastly, we're in Paris. Please enjoy the rest of your time here. And thank you so much for coming.